just the sheriff's department. Everybody's like they're doing their best right now to figure out like if they can get a scent, see where they went. If they went on foot, they went in a car, or they went somewhere. And right now it's just like they've been on point. They're going through the house trying to get a scent, and hopefully they can pick something up to where it's going to lead to something.
What happened? Your wife came home. Tell me what's.
She came home from the airport 2 a.m. and I left around 5:15. She was still here, and like about 12:10 in that afternoon, her friend Nicole showed up at the door. Like I had texted Shanann a few times that day, called her, say, but she never got back to me. But she wasn't getting back to any of her people as well, and that's what really concerned a lot of people. Is like if she's not getting back to her, like if she doesn't get back to me, that's fine. Like she gets busy during the day, but she didn't get back to her people, which was very concerning. And Nicole called me when she was at the door, and that's when I came home. And then
there are crimes so brutal that their details blur in the retelling. But sometimes it is not the crime itself that lingers, but a single unanswered question. In the case of Shanann Watts, that question is this: why didn't she fight back? Her husband, Chris Watts, confessed in chilling detail to strangling his pregnant wife in their bed. In his prison interviews, he claimed she barely resisted, that she cried but did not scream, that she never clawed, never struck, never shouted for help. It is a claim that haunts the record, a detail that chills even more than the crime itself. Because in our minds, we want to believe that love betrayed will resist, that a victim will rage against the hands that destroy them. But here, silence reigned. 7 years later, that silence still echoes. It is replayed endlessly in documentaries, true crime channels, and online forums. People ask not only why Chris killed, but why Shanann, a strong and outspoken woman, seemed so powerless in her final moments. Theories multiply: was she stunned, overpowered, frozen in shock? Or is Chris himself manipulating the truth, erasing her resistance even in death? To ask why Shanann didn't fight back is not to doubt her strength. It is to confront the terrifying reality of violence at the hands of someone you love and trust. Science tells us about the freeze response, about how betrayal can paralyze as completely as physical force. Forensics reveal what the body shows, and what it cannot. Psychology tells us that silence can be both a choice and a prison. This documentary does not retell the night of August 13, 2018. That story is already carved into history. Instead, we turn to what lies beneath, the forensic gaps, the psychological truths, the long silences in a marriage that foreshadowed the final silence in a bedroom. We examine the contradictions in confession, the texts that reveal Shanann's foresight, the family tensions that wore her down, and the haunting digital legacy that preserves her voice even as it reminds us of her absence. Because sometimes the most devastating detail is not the act itself, but the silence it leaves behind. And in the Watts case, that silence is still speaking. If we are to ask why Shanann did not fight back, we must first look at what her body revealed. The autopsy is often called the final testimony of the dead. In Shanann's case, it confirmed what investigators already feared: she died by manual strangulation, her life taken by the hands of her husband. The forensic record described bruising to the muscles of her neck, damage to the strap muscles that support breathing, and abrasions along her face. These marks tell us that force was applied, deliberate and sustained. But beyond the neck, the report is less conclusive. There were no extensive fractures, no broken fingers, no clear signs of a long and violent struggle. To some, this absence has been interpreted as confirmation of Chris's claim. That Shanann offered little resistance, that she went quietly into the darkness. But forensics is not that simple. The absence of defensive wounds does not mean the absence of defense. A victim caught by surprise may have little chance to resist effectively. Strangulation, especially when applied with body weight, can render a person unconscious in seconds. And Shanann was not only caught off guard, she was 4 months pregnant, asleep in bed, her body already vulnerable. Decomposition also complicates what the body can reveal. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave, her body exposed to time and the elements before recovery. Subtle injuries, small scratches, minor bruises, may have faded or disappeared altogether, leaving only the larger traumas behind. The forensic record, then, provides fragments but not certainty. It tells us how she died, but not how she reacted. It shows the violence inflicted, but not whether she screamed, or how desperately she tried to resist. Those answers lie beyond the reach of science. Yet the report does highlight one disturbing truth: strangulation is not instantaneous. Experts testify that it can take 2 to 4 minutes to take a life this way. That means Shanann experienced an eternity of betrayal in her final moments, conscious or unconscious, resisting or frozen. She endured the weight of the man who had vowed to love her pressing the life out of her body. The forensic record cannot tell us whether she fought back. But it does tell us this: her silence was not the silence of peace, but the silence of being overpowered, vulnerable, and betrayed in the most intimate way possible. And that silence still speaks louder than any wound. When violence erupts, we imagine 3 possible responses: fight, flight, or surrender. But psychologists and trauma experts describe a 4th response, one often misunderstood: freeze. It is the body's ancient defense against overwhelming threat. In that state, muscles lock, voice falters, and resistance becomes impossible, even when survival demands it. Shanann's case forces us to confront this reality. Why didn't she scream? Why didn't she claw, strike, or escape? Perhaps the answer lies not in weakness, but in biology. The freeze response is not a choice. It is an involuntary survival mechanism, triggered when the brain perceives danger as inescapable. Victims of intimate partner violence often describe going numb, losing their ability to move, as though their body no longer belonged to them. For Shanann, the betrayal came not from a stranger in a dark alley, but from the man lying beside her. She was 4 months pregnant, exhausted, and vulnerable. She woke to confrontation from the one person she trusted most. In such moments, shock can be as paralyzing as physical force. To process that the father of her children was not only threatening her but ending her life may have been more than the mind could bear in real time. This does not mean she lacked strength. In fact, her life showed resilience at every turn, surviving illness, building a business, raising her daughters with determination. But resilience in life does not always translate into resistance in the face of betrayal. The freeze response does not measure courage, it measures the brain's attempt to endure the unendurable. Chris Watts later claimed that Shanann never fought back. We must weigh that statement carefully. Perhaps she did not, because she could not. Perhaps he says it to minimize her humanity, to erase her resistance even in death. The truth likely lies in between. She may have been shocked into stillness, overpowered before she could react, her body frozen by biology and circumstance. What the psychology of freeze reminds us is that silence in such moments is not consent, nor surrender, nor weakness. It is a tragic testament to the way violence overwhelms the human body. Shanann's lack of resistance, if real, was not her failure. It was the cruel triumph of shock, trust betrayed, and the inescapable weight of the man who ended her life. Long before the silence of that final night, there was another kind of silence in the Watts marriage, a silence that grew slowly, invisibly, until it consumed the relationship. Shanann's texts and emails show her frustration with Chris's withdrawal. She confronted him about his coldness, his lack of intimacy, his refusal to speak openly. Again and again, she begged for honesty, for connection, for him to simply talk. And again, she was met with quiet detachment. Chris's silence was not passive, it was corrosive. When disagreements arose, over finances, family conflicts, parenting, Shanann put her emotions into words. She was direct, sometimes insistent, because she believed problems could be solved if they were named. Chris did the opposite. He shut down, withheld, avoided. For him, silence became a shield. For her, it became abandonment. The tension with Chris's parents magnified this divide. Shanann wanted firm boundaries, especially when it came to her daughter's health. Chris, unwilling to confront his family, withdrew further. In those moments, Shanann stood alone, fighting battles she expected her husband to fight beside her. His silence did not neutralize the conflict, it deepened it, signaling to her that he would not choose her, not even in small ways. Financial strain added another layer. Their life in a large house projected stability, but beneath the surface were debts, unpaid bills, and the shadow of bankruptcy. Shanann worked tirelessly to build income through her business, while Chris retreated further into detachment. Instead of uniting them, the pressure revealed just how separate they had become. For Shanann, this isolation was devastating. She told friends she felt like she was carrying the marriage alone, dragging Chris behind her as she tried to keep the family afloat. Her words reveal a woman who still loved fiercely, still hoped for repair, but who increasingly sensed that her husband was slipping away. 7 years later, we can see how these silences foreshadowed the final tragedy. A marriage is not destroyed in one night, it collapses under the weight of unresolved silence. Chris had already abandoned Shanann emotionally before he abandoned her physically. The man she once believed was her partner became a shadow in her own home, present in body, absent in spirit. When people ask why Shanann did not fight back, perhaps part of the answer lies here. Years of being silenced, of pleading into a void, may have left her exhausted long before her final moments. Her resistance had been worn down not in seconds, but in years. By the time Chris placed his hands around her neck, she had already lived through the death of her marriage. The silence that consumed her that night was the cruel culmination of a silence that had been building all along. Shanann Watts left behind more than memories. She left a digital diary, a living archive of her life, her marriage, her children, her hopes, and her fears. What makes this case uniquely haunting is that Shanann recorded herself constantly. Facebook videos, Instagram posts, text messages, and emails became windows into her private world. Today, 7 years later, those windows are still wide open, allowing millions of strangers to peer inside. To the casual viewer, her videos shine with optimism. She beams as she films her daughters dancing, laughs as she shares family milestones, praises Chris for being a wonderful husband and father. These clips were intended to inspire, to document a life built on gratitude and resilience. But viewed in hindsight, they feel different. They feel like fragments of a life already unraveling. Her private texts tell that other story. In them, Shanann confided to friends about Chris's growing distance. She worried about his lack of affection, his silence, his rejection. She described feeling unwanted, unloved, and increasingly certain that he was hiding something. When she spotted suspicious charges on his credit card, her fears crystallized into certainty: her husband was betraying her. The contrast between the public image and the private reality is one of the most devastating elements of this case. To the world, Shanann projected joy and stability. But in her heart, she carried dread. Her social media became both her armor and her outlet, a way to control the narrative even as her private life collapsed. There is a haunting foresight in her words. She told friends she feared Chris no longer wanted the marriage, that she felt unsafe, that he was pulling away into a secret life she could not reach. In one message, she admitted she didn't know what he was capable of anymore. These were not paranoid ramblings. They were truths seen too clearly, truths that went unheard by the man who should have cared most. Now, her digital traces have taken on a second life. People still scroll through her posts, listen to her voice, watch her smile. For some, it is a way of remembering her. For others, it is an obsession, picking apart her words for signs, clues, or warnings. She has become both a victim and a digital ghost, forever replaying the last chapters of her life in a space where nothing is ever truly gone. The tragedy of Shanann's digital diary is not only what it reveals about her final weeks, but how it traps us, the viewers, in an endless replay. Each post is reinterpreted, reframed, consumed as evidence of betrayal. In trying to preserve her memory, we also relive her collapse, proof that even in death, silence can echo louder than words. If Shanann's silence was haunting, Chris's words were cruel. From the moment his lies began, his confessions became less about truth and more about control. He shifted stories as easily as changing clothes, weaving new versions to suit the moment. Each confession offered less clarity, not more, and each one deepened the betrayal of his wife's memory. At first, he denied everything. Standing on his front porch, he told cameras he wanted Shanann and the girls home safely. He spoke calmly, almost mechanically, with none of the anguish one would expect from a grieving husband. Behind those words was a man already hiding bodies, already sealing his own fate. When investigators pressed harder, he broke, but not in honesty. His first so-called confession blamed Shanann. He claimed she had killed the children, and that he killed her in retaliation. It was a lie designed to protect himself and tarnish her legacy, shifting blame onto the very woman he had destroyed. Forensic evidence quickly disproved this version, but the cruelty of it remains. Even in death, Chris tried to silence Shanann, to rewrite her as the villain of her own murder. Later, when the weight of evidence became undeniable, he admitted to killing them all. But even then, his details changed. He described moments of rage, sudden impulses, blurred memories. He insisted it was not planned. Yet investigators had already uncovered the evidence of forethought, secret searches, financial maneuvers, dreams of a life with another woman. The contradictions revealed not honesty, but manipulation. Years later, in prison interviews, the contradictions only multiplied. He described hearing voices, losing control, blacking out. He claimed Shanann simply lay beneath him and cried softly as he strangled her, never fighting back. Was this detailed truth? Or was it his final act of erasure, robbing her of even the dignity of resistance? Experts warn us that offenders often reshape their narratives to maintain control. By insisting that Shanann did not fight, Chris positions himself as less monstrous, as though her silence was consent, as though the absence of visible resistance lessens the horror of what he did. It is a psychological trick, one that manipulates not only investigators but the public imagination. 7 years later, we cannot untangle fact from fabrication in his words. What we do know is this: every confession was another betrayal, every contradiction another wound inflicted on Shanann's memory. His cruelties did not end with his hands around her throat. They continued in the stories he told afterward, rewriting her silence, distorting her truth, and ensuring that even in death, he would have the last word. But her digital diary, her foresight, and her resilience speak louder still. And they remind us that his contradictions are not truth, they are the desperate lies of a man who cannot escape what he has done. 7 years have passed since Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico were taken. Yet the case refuses to fade. Every year, new articles, new documentaries, new YouTube analyses reopen the wounds. Why? Because the question of Shanann's silence has never been fully answered. And because in her silence, we recognize something deeply unsettling about ourselves. The Watts family looked like the picture of suburban success. A neat house in a quiet neighborhood. Smiling photographs, cheerful videos, a couple raising 2 daughters with a 3rd child on the way. From the outside, they looked ordinary, enviable even. That is why the truth struck so deeply: if it could happen to them, it could happen anywhere. Their normality became the mask that hid the unthinkable. When people ask why Shanann didn't fight back, they are really asking something more: how do we recognize danger when it hides behind love? How do we protect ourselves from betrayal when it comes from the person lying beside us? The silence of her final moments forces us to confront how fragile trust can be, and how quickly it can be weaponized. Psychologists remind us that silence in the face of violence is not surrender. It can be shock, paralysis, or the sheer impossibility of processing betrayal in real time. For Shanann, the weight of her pregnancy, the exhaustion of her marriage, and the shock of sudden attack may have left her defenseless before she had time to resist. Her silence is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of how profoundly intimate partner violence distorts the human response to danger. But her silence has also become cultural. We, the public, replay her videos, her posts, her texts, searching for signs. We consume her digital diary as though it might reveal the exact moment love turned to danger. In doing so, we keep her alive, but we also risk trapping her forever in her final chapter. She becomes less a person and more a ghost, endlessly analyzed but never fully understood. 7 years later, the Watts case remains not only a story of murder but of meaning. It forces us to examine the dark side of ordinary life, the ways silence builds in marriages, the way betrayal hides behind smiles, the way digital legacies keep wounds open long after burial. The question of why Shanann didn't fight back cannot be answered with certainty. But perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the haunting lies in the fact that betrayal itself, sudden, shocking, intimate, robs victims of the chance to resist. And so her silence lingers, not as weakness, but as witness. It is the sound of love collapsing into violence, of trust turning lethal, of a family destroyed from within. And it leaves us with a truth more devastating than any confession: sometimes, the silence of victims says more than words ever could. In the end, the silence that surrounded Shanann's final moments has become the loudest part of this tragedy. It reminds us that danger can hide in plain sight, that betrayal can wear the mask of love, and that violence in the home can leave no time to resist. Her silence was not surrender. It was the silence of shock, of betrayal, of being overpowered by the man she trusted most. Her life was filled with strength, love, and determination, and it is that legacy we must remember. 7 years later, the haunting truth is clear: silence is never neutral. It destroys, it erases, and it lingers. Our responsibility is to listen, to speak, and to remember. If this story moved you, don't let it vanish into silence. Subscribe, share, like, and comment. Keep Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico's names alive, and ensure their story is never forgotten.